Kirti. Greg.
Here.
Vinay.
Here.
Patrick.
Here.
Brandon.
Here.
Awesome. If everyone could look over tonight's agenda for approval. Alex moves, Kane seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? With that, the motion passes. If everyone could look over the minutes from last week.
I'm trying to pull up electronic. The minutes that are here are from March 6th.
Oh, did I print the wrong one?
I don't know if the electronic ones are real.
Oh, probably not. No, because I printed these off of what I emailed. Oh, guess you have minutes next week.
So yeah, we'll move on those next week.
All
I
right.
was looking, I'm like, I didn't say that was the last meeting. That's the first meeting.
Nobody does that as well.
Okay. So now we'll jump into reports. I do not have anything this evening.
Nope. The only real report I just want to bring up, and nothing has changed since the last meeting, but we have $15,800.52 left in the budget for the rest of the year.
The two things I have, one is a reminder, as we discussed last week, that we'll be talking about the service and activities fee policy next week. So again, as a reminder, please take the chance to look over that in advance and make any comments or questions to bring forward so we can, if there are any edits, like the few things we touched on, we'll talk about those again next week. But also I want to make sure we get a chance to look at those kind of in advance. Also, we did initially have on, if you look at our schedule that didn't snap before, the Wellness Center was going to be presenting their base funding program review for the Violence Prevention and Response Coordinator. They had to ask if they can move that to next week due to not being in the office unexpectedly. So we'll only have case management tonight, which ironically, the case manager won't be here because they're out unexpectedly as well, but I will cover that. And then we'll have the Wellness Center next week. The other report I have is just an update that we do have one student position that is going to be vacant this quarter because we have a student who's stepping away from the committee. I don't know if you want to say.
Well, I'm still going to be showing up. I'm still going to try to discuss with you guys. I just felt like, changing major and not doing school because of my own major. Realizing what I need to focus on is better just to step away and focus on other things. But I'm still here to support you guys. If I would like to participate in the discussion. If I'm able to,
I do want to thank you for serving last quarter as well. I think it was greatly appreciated. That's all over report.
So this is the first call for public comment. Is there any public comment at this time? Seeing none, let's move into old business. Let's move into old business, annual reports, the ongoing committee review.
So again, as we did last time, we're going to quickly pop into a couple of these to take a look at them. I think the ones we have in the docket mainly this week is kind of looking at the ASCWU ones. Again, clump them all together and alphabetically, it fits nicely. And then also, you have the academic advisor and the admin support too.
Strategically, I just picked A. Just to let you guys out there. So we're just going to go through them. And I think I'm going to go pretty quickly through these, so please stop me if you guys have any questions. So this one is Club Senate. So this is student government budget. I don't know if we talked a lot about Club Senate, so for those of you that don't necessarily deal with the clubs, that is the other funding source for clubs to come through and ask for additional funding for their activities. Their allocation is 101 and 749. There we go. Spit that out. Each year, they do have some student payroll associated with that, but the majority of their funding is allocated out to be requested through Club Senate and funded that way. So as for fiscal 18, which is really what we're looking at, they actually netted a positive 3,000, so that would be carried over into this current fiscal year. And without knowing exactly what they spend each year, we kind of just earmark what we think is going to happen. So this number most likely will change once we have our actuals come through, but this was their plan for this current year. Any questions about Club Senate? This is another student government budget. It's the Equity and Service Council budget. Similar type of structure. They do have funding requests and actual programming money associated with this budget. That helps, I believe we have 8 orgs, at least 8 active orgs. But either way, if they're an organization, they are under the ESC umbrella. So to kind of give, they get $62,000 a year allocated out. They do have payroll associated and goods and services, which it can be programming or funds requests. So they do a little bit of both in this, but all of it is actually decided at the ESC meetings that they have. This past year, they actually came in with a negative. Or fiscal 18, they came in with a negative fund balance. That's, you know, we see that across the board, so it's not necessarily a bad thing if they intentionally did that. And as you can see, they are in the 4-year period planning to basically net as close to zero as they can. So in some of these that we'll see in the future, you'll see this kind of trend of if they do go negative, they'll try to make it up in the future years. Any questions about ESC? Okay. Ooh, well, we'll just finish all the other ones. And so this is a student life and facilities student government budget. This one is actually different than the other student government budgets. This one doesn't have any funds requests associated with it. So this is really just for programming needs and to help support student life and facilities. They actually have a pretty nice ending fund balance from last year, and so they are still trying to figure out the best way to utilize that. I do know one piece that they're looking into is actually new mascot uniform or suit. So, you know, and those are kind of spendy, and so they were looking at spending that this year. But overall, they are looking at netting a positive if things stay consistent with this plan. Any questions about student life and facilities? Okay. Student Academic Senate. So this one is similar to ESC and Club Senate in the sense that it does have funding requests associated with it. They are allocated $43,000 each year. They do have wages attached to this one, but most of it does go to funding requests. They do have some minimal amount tied to programming, but basically all of it they try to give back to the funding request proposals that come through. And so they netted a positive last year. But some of these that are associated with funding requests actually have to do with when the funding has been reimbursed. So some of these reimbursements, because we close this fiscal year in June, they might not be able to get that reimbursed until the fall because of report backs and some of that. So just because they look like they ended in a positive does not mean that they didn't potentially allocate all their funding out for that year. But overall, they are hoping to basically spend everything, but it does look like they are going to net $3,000 by the end of their 4-year cycle. Any questions about Academic Senate? Okay. Oh, next one. This this one is probably a good, interesting one to look at. So this is what we called the board of directors budget for the student government. So this one is, I believe Jeff came in this year and talked about this one. This one is, the payroll associated with this has to do with our student government officers. They do have some other student workers that do hit this budget, but most of it's their officers. And they had some goods and services. They had some extra money that came over in fiscal 18. And so they had asked to roll this over into the new funding cycle, which was awarded. And so they had some spending associated with that. But a lot of the spending with this budget actually has to do with what we've been talking about with increasing what the officers, the hours that they were getting paid for. So that was last year that the S&A committee voted on. And this year again, Jeff had come in and kind of discussed some insurance pieces and some other base allocation issues with this budget. So knowing that they were basically netting $15,000 last year, they were proposing to use that $15,000 to offset the future years, with the asterisk to say that at some point they will be coming to asking for a base funding adjustment. They just didn't need to do that for fiscal 18. But now that's where we are. Is this year we're looking at netting a negative, and that is without doing any official base increases. Okay. No, any other questions about board of directors budget?
So they're projecting that they're gonna be negative $17,000 in fiscal 20.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess maybe this question's for Kane. Do you see the student government coming in and requesting readjustment for base funding this year, or waiting until next year? Or, whoever can answer that question.
Most likely it would be for this year, but that's, I think, the discussion is just to be transparent of this is where we are. And what isn't reflected in this document, because it came out after the timing of this, is that insurance piece. So so the board of directors pays the insurance costs for all the clubs and organizations, student groups, and everything. And that cost had increased, and I don't have those numbers that Jeff has, but we will get those to you just to actually officially get through that process of the adjustment for base allocation. But those are the types of things that basically increase without us knowing, and so they will be coming at least for the insurance piece, if not for the wages for this year. Okay. And this, the whole point, I think, of this exercise is to show that if they do stay consistent, it's not sustainable. And so it's great to know that they're coming ahead of the game of saying, this is what is happening. And I think looking at this 4-year chunk is the important piece of this. Okay. So, Office of Legislative Affairs, this is the last student government budget, I believe. And at the end of the day, they're actually pretty healthy. They netted a good fund balance last year. So that just carries over, and at the end of the 4-year cycle, they're looking at basically netting $3,500. So it doesn't seem like this one is as in much need as some of the others at this point. So, any questions about this budget?
Just a point on that too, the same office gets supplemented by the WSAP, the Washington Student Association. So Leah has a different budget that comes from students that they pay every quarter as well.
That's actually a good point. So that budget is actually earmarked for specific items like travel costs and lobby fees over on the west side of the state. And this budget is earmarked for more programming needs on this campus and or the centers.
Does the WSA, does that pay the staff member, the lobbyist?
The student? Yes.
Lobbyist?
Mm-hmm. There's some costs associated with that too.
Lucy, did some of the rollover that happened, was that earmarked for the Veterans Memorial that they were working on at one point?
Yes, so that $30-some thousand for the board of directors, yes, they had requested to roll that over for that.
That's what that was.
That's what, the rollover was, but now they're gonna utilize it differently.
And they had come in last year, now it all blurs together.
Yeah, because it was Alex.
Last year because of the change in that plan.
Right.
It got stopped. And so we had veterans as well as board student government, and I think there's one other area that had requested that rollover for that program. And so they all came forward requesting to use the money for other things.
And specifically, the board of directors did use that in the same context of saying, we're not going to be using it for this initiative, but we would be using it to offset these costs for the staffing increases. Nope, no more comments. Okay, admin costs. Sorry, it's real slow scrolling today for some reason. Okay, this one's pretty cut and dry. Obviously netting a zero, they will not be overspending on this budget. But this is how, I mean, there's quite a bit associated with, I believe Pat actually put this together, but of what the admin fee, like basically brief description. So not to make, I mean, I would suggest reading this, but it's very detailed. So you have accounts payable, travel, human resources, IT, lots of different scenarios, payroll, purchasing, student financial services.
And this is because maybe I'm not understanding. We're getting student allocate or S&A funds for, I don't know how to ask this question.
So the question I think you're gonna ask.
You want me to try?
Yeah, you go ahead, Pat.
And then you can.
Yep,
back me
yep.
up. Okay, so the state constitution, the revised code of Washington, the RCWs that we talked about at the meeting, they set in motion the legislative intent of S&A. And in there, it says what you can use it for, it's a little vague, and then it says you specifically cannot use it for general overhead at the university. Because they wanted the money collected from the students to go for the students. But, so that would be general overhead, meaning like paying for a part of the president's office or something. There is, and this was a fairly long process that the university and the committee went through and actually went to arbitration. It was a pretty serious deal. You can ask the S&A committee and have the board agree to pay for specific overhead and stuff. So I think one example would be if the S&A committee funded one student travel trip for the entire year, it'd be pretty easy to say, well, that's probably not a burden on the travel process of the desk. But if they do a lot at some point, you could have had a smaller effort going to the travel desk, and that difference in what the university has been asking the S&A committee to pay. Hopefully that kind of answers your question, and anything to
So
help your question.
S&A, the base funding for that is paying for the administrative side, the stuff that helps the students.
Yeah.
To
Okay.
the best that anyone can figure it out.
Well, and if
Okay,
you
that
think,
makes sense.
yeah, if you think about it, think about how many pieces of the funds request, just the funds request that we've seen that's hit
Oh, yeah.
travel and payroll and all these other things, and even with these IT
Makes
pieces
sense.
too. So that's, I think, the theory of offsetting those costs.
It's not for teachers in the classroom, it's not for the policemen, campus grounds. It's mostly
Student stuff.
Yeah.
Connection.
to make all the stuff that happens here happen.
I mean, really what came back is, there's a number of other things that the admin fee in general, for the other areas that pay it, goes towards. The AG's office came back, and again, in looking at it, said, some of these things, no, you can't use the S&A fee to pay for. These ones can, as it relates to the areas we already base fund, is really what it is. So we're providing the support costs for, instead of like CLCE paying it directly, it's being paid for by this on that side.
So you could go home and Google S&A fee Seattle Times, see what happened 4 or 5 years ago.
6 years. Yeah.
We are.
Yeah.
It's a good question. It's a very good question.
Is this, the number, is it a percentage of 12%, or, is it a percentage of an overall budget, or is it
It's the number packet.
a magic number that Patrick can?
So Pat didn't make up any of this. No. But there were some metrics that said how many student PAFs or higher students from S&A funded areas were there compared to all the other PAFs, and that worked into a percentage. There was one account of computers. I mean, I could bring the thing in, or I could email it out and show you all of it.
I think we have it on the base funding request we did it 2 years ago. I think it has the whole calculation.
And I don't mind sharing it again.
Yeah, but, yeah, it wasn't just an arbitrary, it was based on.
No, I'm
the
sure
usage.
that, I know that, all departments got hit with a
Yeah.
fee, and then this year, isn't that just, they just gave everybody less money and aren't charging 12%. That's crazy.
So this is paying for staff, right, that are working with students, but is this also paying for student staff? In
Well,
those
I think it's
departments?
important to look at the services. So think about, let's just pretend student staff. So S&A fees, one of the biggest expenses they have is student wages. So when you're talking about hiring a student, you're talking about all these individuals have to participate, HR and payroll alone. So this funding is supposed to help basically the influx of hiring all these extra students based off this funding that we have. And then there's other pieces too. I just know that's some of our biggest piece. But one thing that I really want to bring people the attention to is this, the purchasing business services and contracts. We've talked a lot about event programming, and then also the travel desk. So some of these.
Yeah, so a contract for, say, mariachis needs to get worked out. There's somebody doing clinics in time in the contract's office.
Oh, no, I think it's
Yeah.
great, I'm just curious. I guess my question is,
Do we need?
would they be then expecting to increase their budget in fiscal 20 because
No.
of, well, what I'm getting at, the increase in minimum wage in regards to,
Not from the S&A allocation, because we're not, with this, we're giving them a flat amount. So like, and I'll just use HR is getting whatever the percentages of the allotment to then use within their budget as they see.
Each of the 4-year
okay,
thing.
they can't come back and ask for more.
It's
Yeah.
not saying we're
They-
funding this position
They
and
could
this.
try to come back.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just,
Yeah.
Okay, that was my question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions on admin fees?
Great discussion.
Academic advising, West Side. Scott Carleton did do his presentation this year, right? Or did I make that up?
Yeah.
Okay.
You did, yeah.
Yeah, when you were here.
Great. So, so here, at the end of the day, they did show a net positive with the ending fund balance, and it does look like they're going to project it that way. So, I don't have as much information on this as they
And
shared, but
this-
I believe it was a vacancy, if I remember.
Part of it, yes, and this only partially funds the West Side advisor position. And so based on what they currently have, it's looking like that. The hard part is, depending on if they hire new staff or what those are, but there was a partial vacancy which led to that. So as it stands right now, they may have carry forward left at the end, which would be swept back into the S&A budget. But then, again, it depends on who they hire or where things are left for that.
And it's important to really, we're focusing on just 1 year. I mean, it's good to see all the entire funding cycle, but this is the only year that is actual and final. And so I think it'll be a little bit more telling once we close fiscal 19. See 2 years actually. So that's, I think, all the ones we were gonna go over today. We got A done. Kind of like Sesame Street.
Letter A.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's go into new business, subsection A, base funding program reviews. And we have case management. Can you pass me that?
Yes, if you want to pass those around. So I don't have a nice fancy presentation. So Joy Stosky is our Assistant Director of Case Management. I know you all should have in your packets the information that's up here, and also includes the org chart. And so I'll go through a little bit of the information on there within this. And so, stepping away from the advisor role, as Executive Director of Student Rights and Responsibilities, I oversee the case management area. And so passing out the brochures, and you feel free to keep those. I think there's extras if people in the gallery want them too. That talks about just the services, and I'll touch on that a little bit and then get to the questions that we ask on within here. So case management services really is in the Dean of Students' office, and it's a service to assist students who are in crisis or distress. And so really what we do is we either identify on our end based on information coming in, or referrals from people, or students can self-identify to come in, of needing some additional supports. And so what we do is we meet with them, assess what all is actually going on, and kind of triage the level of risk or concern that's there, and then identify resources both on and off campus to connect the student to help kind of meet those needs. And then we provide follow-up care afterwards as well, which is all sounding very simplified in terms of what we do. As those who know and work with us closely like Vinay, it's not that simple when we get into it. Even the brochure makes it seem simple. And Alex knows as well, being in our office. The types of things we deal with a lot of the crisis and distress on campus. The case managers are the ones who actually are in charge of responding and processing the university's suicide concern reports that come in, and work in coordination with the counseling clinic, as well as with comprehensive mental health, which is the off-campus designated crisis response for our county. So we work with those very closely. Our case management area on here, and I'll come into the history piece, is, again, Joy Stosky is our Assistant Director of Case Management, so provides some of the admin piece of that. And then we have 3 case managers who report underneath her. All 4 of them serve in a case management role. The history we have is case management, I'll break down the funding pieces here. Case management has been funded by S&A now for, I have this written on my other one, for 6.5 years now. We actually haven't had, that's when we started it. Case management started with 1 case manager, which actually was Joy. What happened was student government came forward. We had a number of students who were coming forward identifying a need that they were wanting. It was kind of a combination of wanting some additional support pieces. We don't use this as terminology, but kind of a student ombuds person, someone to go to figure out and help them through situations, as well as a growing mental health need that we were seeing of helping students who weren't quite meeting the clinical needs of it, but having just that general distress level within it. And so student government came forward 6.5 years ago to S&A, asking for funding for this position, which was outside of the base funding. That year was actually not a base funding year. The committee provided one-time funding, and then since then has given ongoing base funding support. And so 5.5 years ago, I guess, we ended up getting the base funding for the 1 case manager as we went on. Where we're at now, we see roughly, and if you look at the annual report, which again is on the website, we end up meeting with anywhere between 1,500 and 2,000 students a year through case management with the 4 staff that we have. And that was actually last year's number when we only had 3, so we actually didn't have an assistant director role that I'll talk about. So we see, again, 1,500 to 2,000 students a year through case management that comes on there. That grew over time. For the first 2 years that we had case management, we only had 1 case manager. See, as soon as it's one of those when you build it, they will come situations, it grew exponentially. And so at that point, because of the demand, we actually received funding from University Housing to pay for another case manager temporarily. And then again, that grew exponentially beyond the capacity. And so we had about another 2 years in which we had 2 case managers. Based on the need we saw right before the last base funding, we received one-time funding from the provost office, state support, to hire a 3rd case manager. So when we went to base funding, last base funding cycle, we came in with the general request of wanting to have, and we'll ignore the assistant, wanting all 3 to be ongoing funding from S&A. Again, recognizing that we would love the support to be coming from somewhere else, but the students identifying the need that's on there. We actually received funding for 2 of the positions for ongoing from S&A, with the encouragement that the state support and the administration pay for the other position. The administration came back and actually gave us funding for another case management position. So we had 2 positions from S&A and 2 positions from state support with only 3 case managers at the time. And so that's where we had the salary savings, and we came back last year, if my timing's right, yes, last year, with the request of moving into the model of, instead of having 4, moving to an assistant director, which is what we're doing now. So that's where we came in last year, asking to use the salary savings we had for the rest of the quadrennium from S&A. So right now, if you're looking at the model, the S&A budget pays for the salary and benefits of the assistant director and the case manager, this specific case manager. The other 2 case managers are paid for out of state support as ongoing pieces within all of that. So when you're looking at the overall budget pieces, the breakdown of S&A funding is $146 roughly $1,000 a year, which pays for their salary and benefits. The state support covers the other 2, and then we have just under $10,000 in goods and services, which the Dean of Students provides us. So pretty minimal in terms of budget pieces when we're looking at it. When we talk about the other questions on there, how many students does this area employ? None. We don't have any students who work for us. It's all professional staff. We work, when we talk about understanding how programs and services are offered, they are very specific to the individual, so it's a case-by-case basis. So the individual needs of those students, we meet a number of those services, but we also partner with a ton of different areas on campus, specifically work with housing, disability services, the counseling clinic as I already mentioned, orientation to do ongoing trainings and services and those outreach pieces. And so we get feedback from the students we directly serve. We do an assessment survey to kind of see, did we meet the needs, were things improved, what could we have done better, but also from those ongoing contacts with the other offices to determine what we can do and how we can improve pieces within all of that. And we provide on campus the QPR gatekeeper training. Our area right now is the only ones who are certified to do those ongoing, and so offering those, and so we do those with any number of offices at no charge. We do a lot of the student staff training across campus on that. As I already mentioned with the suicide concern reports, we're involved in the crisis trauma response on campus as well, regardless whether it's happening on and off campus. What else is on here? And then how do you programs and goals support university? Again, given that the mission is to prepare students for enlightened, responsible, and productive lives, is totally the goal, is to give them the skills not only to be productive and successful academically, but also outside of that. So that was my quick, dirty rundown of that. If you go and look at our annual report, it gives you the breakdown of what we do, but also gives you our actual annual report from last year of the number of students we served and what the breakdown of the needs were. When you look at it, the one thing I'll say if you look at it, they like to give a lot of information, so when you look on the website, there will be a lot on there. It gives you the breakdown of what the identifying concern was the student came in for. Students that we meet with often don't fit into a quick, easy checkbox. So a student who may come in presenting as needing financial support may also fall under mental health concerns, family issues, relationship, grief, once we're meeting with them more. So it is a little bit more complex than it looks on that report. So, questions?
Do you see the state funding less positions or more positions in the future
For case management?
for case management?
I mean, where we're at right now, and I guess one of the pieces I didn't touch on, is until 2 years ago when we did base funding, our case manager positions were 10.5-month positions. We moved them at the time when we did the base funding, so last year and this year they're at 11-month. And the next part we're really looking at is really just expanding, because for those who are here throughout the year, we have students showing up throughout the year, and so I don't foresee us in our office directly necessarily needing in the immediate future to extend more than where we're at. I think we're in a good spot to meet the needs of the population now. Now, as we're growing with enrollment numbers, it may come up. I think the big part now is needing potentially to expand from 11 months to 12 months so we can serve the whole year. Because right now, and they're all exempt staff, and so for those who don't know, exempt have to take their leave in 40-hour chunks, and to make sure we have staffing that people are here during the school year can be a challenge, that they're all gone at the same time in the summer. So one, I don't see us really putting in a request for it. I do see, based on the state allocations and a lot of the conversation, and because we work, while they're not, all the case managers have backgrounds in counseling, but they don't serve as clinical practitioners. We're very clear undivided net line, but a lot of the conversation is about these types of support services, and so it would not be a surprise if there was increased funding if it were to be asked for.
I've worked in education a lot in the past, but one thing I've always been curious about is like, do you all keep records of like the students that self-refer versus are referred by like resident assistants or all
Yep.
staff versus behaviors of concern?
Yes. And in fact, that's on our annual report, if I get to the right page on here. So, or maybe we didn't give that to you on this last one. Hold on. We have it on ours, so yeah, we have it on there as the breakdown. It's not on the one we sent to you all. But yeah, we have a whole number of, a lot we get, so behaviors of concern are also all coordinated by our office, either on the student conduct side, which is that other branch, or on the case management. And the suicide concern report, we get a lot that are referred from counseling clinic or others, and a lot less than the others, but it's growing in terms of the self-referral, but we keep track of all of where those are, if they're coming from housing versus off campus. Yeah. To track all those trends. Other questions? Awesome, thank you.
Alright, let's go ahead and start subsection B, the supplemental funding request presentation. And start with request 1946, the National Tech and Social Science Conference from the Political Science Club. Come on up. Alright, we'll do a second call later in the meeting. Now supplemental funding request 1947, the ASSP Risk Management Conference.
And where's the easiest place for us to stand? Just right here?
I mean, it is recorded down
Oh,
there,
okay,
so yes.
sweet.
Yeah.
So 10 minutes to present or 10 minutes?
Okay.
Yeah.
Which one? Just.
Should be,
Oh,
oh, there it goes, okay.
Okay, so just jump into it. Okay, so I'm Kate. I'm the ASSP Student Section Treasurer. ASSP stands for the American Society of Safety Professionals. We're asking for $1,490 to send 4 students to Chicago for a risk management conference. We're actually leaving a week from tomorrow, so we're really excited. This number is lower than what is on the budget, or like the agenda, so I can kind of get into that or explain that. So some of the things we're asking for are the motor pool, airport parking, transportation is like Uber to and from the airport once we get to Chicago. We have included food on there. I know historically that doesn't normally get funded, but it is a cost that we are anticipating, so I did include it. I did not just make up that number, I got that number from the GSA per diem, so that's kind of what we're expecting. And then I did add a museum cost. We have about 5 hours on Friday between the conference ending and needing to be at the airport. So coming from a university that is heavy on gen eds and full, well-rounded individuals, we're kind of hoping to spend that time at the Chicago Art Institute instead of just at the airport. And then we have additional hotel and airfare costs. So the reason that our costs are lower than the ones that we presented to you was that we were able to jump onto flights, and so they ended up being a little bit cheaper than we thought they were going to be. So I'm going to turn it over to Abraham, who's going to kind of talk on the benefits of this conference, and then we'll have questions.
Howdy y'all. Thanks for your time for letting us present and allowing us to actually go to this conference. For me personally, this conference is focused heavily on risk management. I minor for the first time ever. So just knowing that, I'm going to go and talk with a lot of the speakers and kind of get their idea of what are some future risks that as a soon-to-be graduate of this college, what I'm going to be facing in the work industry, in manufacturing, and all kinds of different aspects of business, risks that could be retained through a business budget yearly, just overall risks that might have and can, like, past risks that were looked at badly can be turned into a good benefit. Like a decision that maybe a business would take to not do anything or change policy that could affect them overall. I just feel that I'm going to go to this conference and talk to people that are in the industry right now and come back with something that would benefit me in my career, and then we will be presenting to John's Lake on who we're Club Senate when we get back, and just kind of provide some information of who we talked to, what we learned, and just how we can help other students to see the benefit of risk management in industry today.
So other funding sources, we have been funded by SAS, we have been funded by Club Senate, and we did get an industry donation contingent on us coming back and giving that presentation on what we've learned and how we can apply it at the university. And then we did have a fundraiser last weekend. So I think that is about all we have. We could field some questions.
Eric?
With the food, is there, is this being requested because there's need, or?
We requested it because it is one of the costs. So when we broke down the budget that we turned in, that is a cost that is going to be going to the students if it's not funded in some way. So we included it. You know, historically, like I said, I know it's not usually funded, but I did include it for that reason. Yes.
So you have these other funding sources.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to do a little shell game and move that food cost to one of the other budgets, or is that?
No, so it's, they were explaining that they receive funding from SAS and Club Senate, and both those funding sources do not approve funding related to food.
And the industry money, who's that? Is that you were talking about when you get back, or your fundraising efforts?
So our fundraiser was last weekend, and we do anticipate using a lot of that money for food money if it's not funded this way. So we do have another source of funding for that.
In the industry you're referring to when you get back?
So we had used that money because of like the timing with spring break and stuff and not being able to get on the docket until this week. We had used that donation to book our hotels.
Okay.
So you have 4 students going.
Mm-hmm.
How were these 4 students selected to attend this conference?
So we have 2 seniors going from the Safety and Health Management program, and then we had 2 spots available because it was a male and a female. We looked at interests and who had not been to a conference before and who was studying the risk management minor, and kind of just fishbowled it.
2 questions. Is everybody that's traveling going to be currently enrolled in spring quarter? Because it looks like you're leaving the 10th of April.
Mm-hmm.
So is everybody going to be a currently enrolled student?
Yes.
Okay. I know that sounds silly. And then are you guys receiving any sort of like academic credit associated with this conference at all, or going to a conference?
We are not receiving any academic credit. So the host of this conference is an organization that issues certifications in risk management and insurance. So they're hosting it, and part of being in the risk management minor is the goal to get this certification. We're all studying to get this certification, so there is kind of like an academic component, like to be part of this organization, but we're not getting any sort of credit. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions? Seeing none, we'll be voting on this next week.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, here's this.
Next up, we have funding request 1948. HRSA Regional Conference. Alright, we'll do a second call for that later. So request 1950, the McNair Research Travel from the mysterious McNair students.
Don't put my name on the docket, I see that.
Alright,
You're ready. All right, good evening, everyone. Yeah,
So I will be requesting funding for airfare for my McNair research that I'll be doing this summer. I received the McNair scholarship to conduct research, and so I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. So just kind of the background, the topic that I'll be researching. The title of my research is going to be the history and development of solidarity between the Israeli Black Panther Party and the Palestinian Liberation Organization. I know it's a mouthful, it's great. And I'll try to give you a little bit of background, condense a very complicated international conflict into a very short summary. Anyway, so if you know anything about the history of Israel and Palestine, after the Holocaust, there was a huge influx of Jewish immigrants into the Palestinian region. To deal with this, the UN decided to create what they called a partition plan, where they split some of the land into Israeli territory and some of the land into Palestinian territory. Israel then became a state, began occupying Palestinian territories after the war in 1948. So in the 1960s and 70s, when the American Black Panther Party began, they expressed pretty explicit support for the Palestinian side of this conflict. They kind of saw the Israeli occupation of those territories as an extension of Western imperialism and things like that, and so they voiced their support for that side. Then later on in the 70s, a group of Mizrahi Jews in the state of Israel, who the Mizrahi are the Jews that immigrated from the Middle Eastern countries. So the Ashkenazi are the Jews that immigrated from all the European countries. The Mizrahi are the Middle Eastern ethnicity within the Jewish state. So that group decided to create an organization named after the American Black Panthers, which in Hebrew is Hapantrim Hashorim. So they created this party within the state of Israel that basically mirrored the American Black Panthers down to their platform, their goals, their methods. And so this group started becoming active around the 1970s to the 1990s. They actually won a few seats in the Israeli parliament. And so this is the group that I will be studying. So the first couple of questions that I'll be asking within this research are, what are kind of the social conditions that caused the Mizrahi to create this group, and how are those social conditions similar to the social conditions of the Black Americans that decided to create the Black Panthers in America. And then off of that question, I will be asking why the Mizrahi chose the Black Panther Party specifically to model their organization after. What was it about that group that caused them to adopt their platform and their goals? And because there was this solidarity between the Black Panthers in America and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, kind of one of the major questions I'll be asking is, was there a similar level of solidarity between the Israeli Black Panther Party and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, given that the Black Panthers in America and the Black Panthers in Israel had similar goals, similar platforms, similar ideas about imperialism? So that will be the main question, and if we figure that out, I would love to ask the question, how did that kind of play out in the state of Israel? Did they collaborate on any campaigns or any demonstrations? Did they collaborate on specific policies? And so those are the main questions that I'll be asking. So the main two ways that I will be conducting this research are, right now I'm compiling a literature review of all the relevant literature on the Israeli Black Panther Party, on the Mizrahi ethnic group, on the American Black Panthers, on the PLO. And then secondly, and this is what this travel will be for, since there isn't really any literature on the Israeli Black Panther Party and their connection to the PLO, I will have to go conduct interviews with the founders and original members and associates of the Israeli Black Panther Party. So right now I'm getting all of my human subject paperwork in order to go over to Israel and Palestine and interview the founders of this party, and to kind of get their thoughts on the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories. So that's going to be my main purpose in going over to Israel and Palestine. I'll also have access to the Israeli archives. I'm currently in contact with an academic at the Hebrew University who has access to the Israeli archives. And then one of our professors here, actually, Salam Awad, who is my faculty mentor for this project, she lives in Palestine during the summer. She's Palestinian, so she will be helping me get around the West Bank, and we'll hopefully be interviewing some members of the PLO while we're there. And then just the reason that I believe this research will be valuable. One is obviously the conflict in Israel and Palestine is an incredibly relevant topic, especially in the field of international relations and political science. It covers so many different areas of political science that it's a topic of interest to a lot of different fields within political science, whether that's international relations or race and ethnicity or social class. And so I think it'll be really relevant in that area, as well as the idea that if there was a group of Jews in Israel who found a way to find solidarity with the Palestinians, and that peace had already been reached, then I think it's interesting and it's important to study that solidarity and study how that peace was reached, because the international community has been at a loss for the past 60 years of how to achieve peace in this region. And so if two groups already found a way to do that, then I think it's really important for us to study that and figure out how that was done. And then lastly, like I said, there isn't really any literature on this specific topic, and so just expanding the research in this area I think is going to be really important, and the fact that that's going to be coming out of Central Washington University I think is just a bonus. So just a quick itinerary. I will be leaving the U.S. On June 16th. It's a 30-hour flight. I will be landing June 18th in Tel Aviv. And then I will be traveling down to Jerusalem, where I'll be staying for a week. And like I said, I'll be connected with some academics at the Hebrew University while I'm there, so I can be conducting my research and accessing the archives. And the next week I'll be in Ramallah in the West Bank. And so I'll be there for a week interviewing members of the PLO and different members of the Palestinian community. My faculty mentor will be there with me while I'm in Ramallah, and then I leave on the 29th, fly out of Tel Aviv, and get back here. This should be in the funding packet, but this is basically how all of my costs are breaking down. I'm just requesting the $1,800 for flights, because that's the only thing that the McNair program doesn't fund, is airfare. So everything else, housing, ground transportation, books, all that will be funded by McNair, and then I'll be pitching in for the per diem. So yeah, just requesting the $1,800 for the flights. Yeah, that is all I have. Any questions?
Any questions? Brandon?
I guess just kind of go your itinerary, and just kind of like maybe like read off for like 4 days. Are these something that will take up like the entire day?
So I actually can't reach out to the subjects that I want to be interviewing until all of the IRB process is complete, the human subjects process is complete. So I have a list of names that I have on the Jerusalem side and on the Ramallah side. I just won't be able to reach out to them until I get that confirmation. But yes, so there are about 15 or 20 individuals that I'll be trying to reach out to while I'm there, so it'll take up that whole time.
Steve, follow-up question.
Yeah.
We like emailed a little bit. Did you reach out to Steve Cook?
Yes, so everything went through international studies, got all the safety stuff out of the way, and so we're all good. Yeah. Yes.
Just a clarifying question. Are you earning academic credit?
No. Yes.
Wow. That's very exciting.
Thanks. Yes.
No question. Just because I had to go through the same process. What's your end goal? What's going to be the penultimate
Right. So
result?
the overarching question is whether there was any level of solidarity between the Israeli Black Panther Party and the Palestinian Liberation Organization. So I just wanted to really answer that question because there's no real information on that, and within the context of was there a peace at any point in this region that we can kind of model foreign policy on in the future.
Are you writing a paper? Or like,
Yes. So I'll be writing a research paper with the goal of publishing it, and then I'll be presenting it as source in the fall, I believe. Yeah.
Any further questions?
All right, thank you.
All right, one more call for supplemental funding request 1946, the National Tech and Social Science Conference. Seeing none. Request 1948, the PERSA Regional Conference. All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead into other business communications or received. I don't have any. Joey.
Well, that's what I was gonna,
Okay.
so two things. So before we jump into that,
Yeah.
to go back to those two, and I'm quickly looking at their dates. And both groups were reached out to. Neither has, I just double checked as a moment ago. Neither has responded on my end, but they were notified. I guess the question from you all will be how you would like to handle these. I'm looking to make sure they're not gone right now. Yeah, the person one they would have just gotten back, and the other one is scheduled for about a week from now. So we can put forward information if you all want to discuss it, or if there are questions you want to submit. I can reach out and see if we do get a response, and if they're willing to come next week. Or we can just put it on the docket for you all to deliberate and vote on next week. Again, since we haven't heard anything, it's kind of a hard one to know whether it was they just missed the notification with the start of the quarter or what that is. So,
But to be clear, they're not required to come here.
yeah, there's no requirement.
It's just
Anything we have in writing, it's just been, committee's preference in the past.
I would say just talk about it.
Okay. I will reach out, and if for whatever reason they do say, "Oh, I missed," is there any way? And again, because it'll be before I put the agenda out. I'll let them know that we're going to be discussing on it. But if they do want to share anything briefly in advance or submit anything, I'll let you all know. But I'll put it on both of them on the docket to vote on next week.
Any further discussion? And then now let's go into other business communications received. I have not received any.
I think the only one, and again, just as a heads up to you all, is we did get a request which they're working on, so it'll be coming forward from the West Side Student Affairs base funding area that we have, just looking at coming before the committee to make a slight tweak in the wording of how they use the funding. And again, they'll give more details, but really it specifically talks about the West Side centers, and they're hoping to be able to amend that so they can use some of that funding to also help support some pieces on the East Side centers as well. So they're going to finish up some pieces that they've been in communication with Lacey and myself, but we'll be submitting that here soon to come forward to you all. So just as a heads up.
Did we talk about this one?
Last time?
Nope.
So just as a heads up on another West Side, this is a West Side Funds, or club on the West Side. Wow, it's late in the day. And we were talking about options of submitting a presentation, and it didn't sound like they were able to meet the time for Wednesday, so they will plan on submitting an electronic presentation for us to view. So just as a heads up, we're going to be sending out some communication, but we most likely will go ahead and email that to the committee once we have that presentation finalized.
She said she was gonna voice over the slides,
Oh.
so it should be a normal presentation.
And the way we discussed is if there are questions from the committee, what we can do is after we view it, we can submit them the questions and then have the answers by the time the next week when we deliberate if they get back to us. But thank you for giving that heads up.
Awesome. So this is the second call for public comment. Is there any public comment at this time? Eric?
I like seeing the picture from the art club in San Francisco. They looked like they had a good time. That's cool.
So for those of y'all that are returning next year and are potentially looking at returning to the committee, the students particularly,
Faculty, you're all still on it next
You're
year.
No choices for you.
me and Jeff Rosenberry are going to be going through a revamp of the application process. So if you're looking to be back on next year, the application's online right now is still up, but don't apply to it. We'll get a new one out hopefully by the end of this month. So, and that goes for any committees in general as well.
As a reminder, again, make sure to look over the policy so we have feedback. So it's not just me talking next week.
Okay.
Eric?
Question about that?
Sure.
And this is just, I've been thinking of things the other day. Is it possible within that context to put presentations at source as part of policy?
Well, it's hard to figure out how you would enforce that, because most of the money would have gone out, and if they didn't carry through in the spring.
That's fair.
To answer the question, yes. However, I would probably recommend against it for a lot of, once it's in policy, I mean, again, there's no guarantee on source and those types of
Oh,
things.
yeah.
But yes, we would have the ability.
I was just thinking in regards to how OUR requires source presentation.
public comment.
For all like kind of returning students for next year, as well as just kind of all of you that are returning, you're all super engaged, involved students. I want to push you all to maybe be a write-in candidate for student government. We have not that many candidates this year. One of the positions is even empty. We can talk about that more if you want, but the process to become a write-in candidate is super easy. You just grab one of these packets that I have, sign it, mark what position you want to run for, and then you can start campaigning with everyone else. I'm the elections coordinator, so if you ever have questions on how to do it, what's effective, I can answer that and help you all succeed.
But yes, please encourage anyone because you want to make sure.
Yeah.
Executive Vice President or something.
All right, any further public comment? Seeing none. Is there a motion for adjournment? Eric moves, Kane seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstaining? With that, the motion passes and we are adjourned at 6:31.
There is more food. Please take it.
Please take it. There's a giant bowl of guacamole.
Don't take the
All
bowl.
that rice.